A lone woman in a war-torn land opens her door to a bleeding warrior from the enemy side. What happened next would change her life and his forever. Stay with me to uncover the choices that challenged everything they believed in. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you like this story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. Sarah Miller had been living alone in her small cabin on the Texas frontier for nearly 2 years now. After losing her husband to a sudden fever, she had learned to survive on her own, tending to her small garden, hunting when necessary, and keeping to herself. The nearest settlement was a 3-day ride, and visitors were rare in this contested territory where tensions between settlers and the Comanche people ran high. It was a crisp autumn morning when everything changed. Sarah had just finished collecting eggs from her small chicken coop when she heard the sound, a pained groan that was distinctly human. Her hand instinctively moved to the rifle she kept propped against the cabin wall. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice steady despite her racing heart. When no answer came, Sarah cautiously approached the front of her property. That's when she saw him, a young Comanche warrior, collapsed face down near her front door, blood soaking through his buckskin clothing. A gunshot wound in his side was bleeding profusely. Sarah froze. The settlers and the Comanche had been engaged in a bloody conflict for years. Her own neighbors, the Thompsons, had been killed in a raid just last summer. Every instinct told her to bar her door and let nature take its course. This man was her enemy, but something else stirred within her, the memory of her husband, a doctor who had sworn to help anyone in need, regardless of who they were. "Lord help me," she whispered, setting down her rifle and approaching the wounded man. He was young, perhaps no more than 25, with long black hair and pain etched across his face. His eyes fluttered open as she knelt beside him, revealing a momentary flash of fear before clouding with pain again. "I'm going to help you," Sarah said, knowing he probably couldn't understand her words. "But I can't carry you inside on my own. You'll have to try to stand." Using gestures more than words, Sarah managed to communicate her intent. With considerable effort, she helped the warrior to his feet. He was taller than she had initially thought, and despite his injury, he moved with a natural grace. Together, they stumbled into her cabin, where she guided him to her own bed. "My name is Sarah," she said, pointing to herself as she gathered clean cloths and a basin of water. "Sarah." The man watched her warily, his hand still pressed to his wound. After a moment's hesitation, he responded, "Tashunka." Sarah nodded, acknowledging the introduction. "Tashunka. I'm going to help you, but I need to see the wound." She motioned toward his injury, and after a moment's hesitation, Tashunka moved his hand away. The bullet had torn through his side, but from what Sarah could tell, it had passed clean through without hitting any vital organs. It was the blood loss that concerned her most. As she worked to clean and bandage the wound, Sarah's mind raced with the implications of what she was doing. If any settlers discovered she was harboring a Comanche warrior, they would consider it treason. If Tashunka's people found her, they might assume she was the one who had shot him. "You're safe here," she said, more to reassure herself than him. For now, at least. Tashunka watched her with dark, intelligent eyes that seemed to assess her every move. When she finished bandaging his wound, he caught her wrist gently, a gesture that startled her. But instead of the threat she half expected, he simply nodded once, a clear expression of gratitude. That night, Sarah slept in a chair by the fire, her rifle across her lap. She woke frequently to check on her patient, whose fever had begun to rise as the night progressed. By morning, Tashunka was burning up, muttering words in his native language that Sarah couldn't understand. "Hold on," she whispered, placing a cool cloth on his forehead. "Just hold on." She remembered her husband's teachings about wound fever and searched through her small store of dried herbs. Finding what she needed, she brewed a strong tea and coaxed Tashunka to drink it. Throughout the day, she repeated this process, watching anxiously for any sign of improvement. By sunset, his fever had broken, and Tashunka slept more peacefully. Sarah allowed herself to relax slightly, sinking into her chair with exhaustion. She had made her choice to treat this man as a human being in need rather than an enemy. Now she would have to live with the consequences. The next morning Sarah woke to find Tashunka watching her. He was sitting up in bed, still pale but clearly stronger than the day before. "Thank you," he said in heavily accented but clear English, surprising her completely. "You speak English," Sarah said, unable to hide her shock. Tashunka nodded. "Some. Learned from missionary who lived with my people for 2 summers. Sarah approached cautiously, checking his bandages. "The wound is healing well. You're lucky the bullet passed through cleanly." "Not luck," Tashunka replied. "The spirits guided me here." Sarah wasn't sure how to respond to that. Her Christian upbringing didn't leave much room for spirit guides, but she respected his beliefs. "Who shot you?" she asked instead. Tashunka's expression darkened. "Soldiers. They attack our hunting party near the river. I was separated from my brothers." Sarah tensed at the mention of soldiers. If they were patrolling nearby, they might come looking for survivors, and finding a settler harboring a wounded Comanche would lead to serious trouble. "Your people will be looking for you," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Tashunka confirmed, "but not no to look here." He gestured to the cabin and then to Sarah. "Why you help enemy?" The question hung in the air between them. Sarah moved to the fireplace, stirring the embers to life as she considered her answer. "My husband was a doctor," she finally said. "He believed that healing came before all other concerns. Before sides in a war, before differences in how we pray or how we live." She turned to face Tashunka. "I'm not a doctor, but I couldn't just let you die on my doorstep." Tashunka studied her face, as if searching for deception. Finding none, he nodded slowly. "Your husband, where is he now?" "He died 2 winters ago. Fever took him in 3 days." A look of understanding crossed Tashunka's face. "I am sorry. To lose one's mate is like losing part of your spirit." Sarah was struck by how precisely he had captured her feeling of loss. For the first time since finding him wounded, she truly saw Tashunka not as a Comanche warrior, but simply as another human being who understood grief. "You should rest," she said, composing herself. "I'll make some food." As she prepared a simple stew, Sarah found herself in an impossible situation. The conflict between settlers and the Comanche tribes had claimed countless lives on both sides. By helping Tashunka, she was placing herself in danger from both her own people and his. Yet something told her she had made the right choice, one her husband would have approved of. What she didn't know was how drastically this decision would change her life in the days to come. 3 days passed with Tashunka recovering steadily under Sarah's care. Each day brought new revelations as they cautiously shared pieces of their lives. Sarah learned that Tashunka was the son of a respected elder, that he had a younger sister who made the finest beadwork in the tribe, and that before the conflicts with the settlers had escalated, he had dreamed of being a healer among his people. "My grandfather taught me about plants that heal," he explained, as he watched Sarah change his bandages. "He said I had the gift to see which plants carry strong medicine." "My husband would have liked to learn from your grandfather," Sarah replied. "He was always looking for new remedies." These quiet exchanges built a fragile bridge between them, but reality was never far from Sarah's mind. Tashunka was healing quickly and would soon be strong enough to return to his people. The thought brought her both relief and an unexpected sense of loss. On the morning of the 4th day, as dawn broke over the prairie, Sarah was awakened by the sound of horses approaching. Grabbing her rifle, she rushed to the window. "Riders!" "Coming," she hissed, hurrying to Tashunka's side. 3 men settlers by the look of them. Tashunka immediately tried to rise, his body tense and ready for conflict despite his injury. "No," Sarah said firmly, pushing him back down. "You're not strong enough yet, and if they find you here, they'll kill us both." She thought quickly. "Under the bed, there's a space between the floorboards where I keep my valuables. It's just big enough for a man if you lie flat." Tashunka hesitated only briefly before nodding. With Sarah's help, he slid into the hiding space, and she quickly replaced the loose floorboard, covering it with the corner of a rag rug. She had just straightened her dress and hair when a knock came at the door. Taking a deep breath, Sarah opened it to find 3 men on horseback. She recognized the leader immediately, Jacob Thornton, a rancher whose hatred of the Comanche was legendary after his brother's family had been killed in a raid. "Morning, Mrs. Miller," Thornton said, removing his hat. His politeness did nothing to soften the hardness in his eyes. "Sorry to trouble you so early, Mr. Thornton," Sarah acknowledged with a nod. "What brings you out this way?" "We're tracking a Comanche war party. Ambushed a cavalry patrol 3 days back. Most of the Indians were killed, but we think 1 or 2 escaped. Saw some blood trails heading this direction." His eyes scanned the area behind her. "You seen anything unusual these past few days? Any strangers passing through?" Sarah kept her expression neutral. "No, sir. Just been tending to my garden and animals. Haven't seen a soul." Thornton studied her face for a moment, and Sarah felt her heart pounding in her chest. Finally, he nodded. "Well, you best be careful, Mrs. Miller. Living out here alone ain't safe with those savages about. If you see anything, you fire 3 shots in the air. Someone'll hear it and come running." "I appreciate the concern," Sarah said, "but I manage just fine on my own." Thornton's eyes narrowed slightly. "Your husband was a good man, Mrs. Miller. He's not here to protect you anymore. You ought to consider moving into town where it's safer." "This is my home, Mr. Thornton. I'm not leaving it." The rancher sighed. "Suit yourself." He turned to go, but then paused. "Mind if we water our horses at your creek before moving on?" Sarah hesitated only a fraction of a second. "Of course not. Help yourselves." As the men dismounted and led their horses to the small creek that ran behind her property, Sarah remained at the door, her hands clenched tightly at her sides. She could feel Tashunka's presence in the cabin behind her like a physical weight. After what seemed an eternity, the men returned to their horses. Thornton tipped his hat to her once more. "You take care now, Mrs. Miller, and remember what I said, 3 shots if you need help." Sarah nodded and watched as they rode away, waiting until they were well out of sight before rushing back inside. She quickly moved the rug and lifted the floorboard. Tashunka emerged, his face glistening with sweat from the cramped space and the strain on his healing wound. "They gone?" he asked, his voice tight. "Yes," Sarah replied, helping him back to the bed. "But they're searching the area. They know someone escaped from the ambush." Tashunka's face hardened. "Not ambush, we were hunting. Soldiers attacked without warning." Sarah didn't know what to believe. Both sides had their versions of events, and the truth was often lost in the telling. What she did know was that the presence of search parties meant Tashunka couldn't safely leave yet, and that keeping him here was becoming increasingly dangerous. "You need to rest," she said, checking to make sure his wound hadn't reopened. "The men will likely continue their search to the north and west. That should give us a few days before it's safe for you to travel." Tashunka caught her hand. "Why you continue to risk? Man said you should go to town. Would be safer for you." Sarah gently withdrew her hand. "I told you this is my home. I won't be driven from it by fear." She turned away, busying herself with preparing breakfast. "Besides, you're not well enough to travel yet." Later that afternoon, as Sarah was hanging laundry outside, she spotted a plume of dust in the distance. Shielding her eyes from the sun, she made out a small group of riders, moving in the opposite direction from where Thornton and his men had gone. The riders were moving differently, more fluid on their horses, and even from this distance, Sarah knew they weren't settlers. Comanche warriors searching for their missing brother. Sarah hurried inside, her heart racing. "There are Comanche riders to the south," she told Tashunka, who was sitting by the window, looking stronger than he had just days before. His eyes lit up. "My people search for me." He moved to stand, but Sarah stopped him. "You can't go to them yet. The settlers are still searching the area. If they see your people, there will be bloodshed." Tashunka looked torn, clearly wanting to rejoin his tribe, but understanding the danger. If they find your cabin, see you alone. Double quotes. The implication hung in the air between them. Sarah knew the risks. To many Comanche warriors, settlers were enemies. To be eliminated, just as many settlers viewed all Comanche as savages to be driven out or killed. They won't find us, Sarah said with more confidence than she felt. The cabin is hidden by the trees, and they appear to be heading west. As night fell, Sarah and Tashunka sat in tense silence, listening for any sound of approaching riders from either direction. The gravity of their situation weighed heavily upon them both. If my people find me here, Tashunka finally said, I will tell them you saved my life, that you are not enemy. Sarah gave him a sad smile. Will they believe you? Tashunka's silence was answer enough. And if your settler friends find me, he continued after a moment, will you tell them I did not harm you? They aren't my friends, Sarah replied. But yes, I would tell them. I doubt they would listen any more than your people would. They sat in silence again, the fire crackling between them, casting long shadows across the cabin walls. Two people from worlds at war, finding a fragile moment of understanding in the eye of the storm. Tomorrow, Tashunka said decisively. I leave tomorrow night. Can travel in darkness. Avoid both search parties. Sarah wanted to protest that he wasn't strong enough yet, but she knew he was right. Each day he remained increased the danger to them both. I'll prepare some food for your journey, she said, accepting the inevitable. And wrap extra bandages for your wound. Tashunka studied her face in the firelight. Why sad? You will be safe when I gone. Sarah looked up, surprised that he had read her expression so easily. I'm not sad, I'm concerned for your safety. It wasn't the whole truth, and somehow she knew that Tashunka was aware of this. In just a few days, this man she should have feared had become someone she cared about, not in a romantic way, but in the way one human recognizes the value of another's life and spirit. I have survived many dangers, Tashunka said with quiet confidence. We'll survive this one too. Sarah nodded, hoping he was right. As they prepared for his departure the following night, neither could have imagined how their paths would cross again, or the storm that was gathering on the horizon. The next day passed with an almost unbearable tension. Sarah found herself constantly checking the horizon for riders, while Tashunka tested his strength, walking around the cabin and practicing movements that would not reopen his wound. By afternoon, it was clear he had recovered enough to travel, though Sarah still worried about the long journey back to his people. As dusk approached, Sarah packed a small bundle of provisions, dried meat, corn cakes, and a small pouch of medicinal herbs. For his wound, she added a water skin and, after a moment's hesitation, the small hunting knife that had belonged to her husband. For protection, she said, handing him the blade. And to remember that not all settlers wish harm to your people. Tashunka accepted the gift with solemn reverence. I will keep it always, he promised, tucking it into his belt. And remember, woman who saved enemy when others would let die. Sarah helped him fashion a makeshift bow from a flexible branch, not as powerful as his own would have been, but enough to hunt small game if needed. As full darkness fell, they both knew it was time for him to leave. Follow the creek south for 2 days, Sarah instructed. It will lead you to the river. Your people often camp near the bend with the 3 large boulders. Tashunka looked at her with surprise. You know our camps? I've explored these lands for 2 years, Sarah replied. I've seen your people from a distance. I've always stayed hidden. A new understanding passed between them. Sarah had been living alongside the Comanche all this time, neither seeking conflict nor contact, simply coexisting on the same land. Tashunka nodded, then reached into a small pouch at his waist. He withdrew a simple leather bracelet adorned with a single blue bead. This belonged to my mother, he said, holding it out to Sarah. Now it's yours. If you ever in danger from my people, show this. Tell them name of Tashunka, son of Chief Machk. They will not harm you. Sarah hesitated before accepting the meaningful gift. I can't take something so personal. You gave me life, Tashunka said simply. this small thing in return. Recognizing the importance of the exchange, Sarah carefully tied the bracelet around her wrist. Thank you. They stood awkwardly for a moment, two people from different worlds who had briefly shared the same space. Then Tashunka surprised her by extending his hand in the settler's greeting he had seen. Sarah took it, and they shook hands in the formal way of her people. May your journey be safe, she said. May Great Spirit watch over you, he replied. With that, Tashunka slipped into the darkness, moving with the natural stealth of his people. Sarah stood at the door of her cabin, watching until she could no longer see his silhouette against the night sky. Only then did she allow herself to acknowledge the emptiness that settled over the cabin. For nearly a week after Tashunka's departure, Sarah jumped at every unusual sound, fearing the return of either settler search parties or Comanche warriors. But no one came, and gradually she returned to her solitary routine, tending her garden, caring for her animals, and preparing for the coming winter. The first snow came early that year, dusting the prairie with white in late October. Sarah had just finished storing the last of her preserved vegetables when she heard horses approaching. This time, there was no mistaking the sound, not 3 riders, but many more. Heart pounding, she grabbed her rifle and peered through the window. What she saw made her blood run cold. A cavalry unit, at least 20 soldiers, was approaching her cabin. At their head rode a man whose bearing marked him as an officer, and beside him, her stomach clenched, was Jacob Thornton. Sarah took a deep breath and stepped outside to meet them, rifle held casually but ready. Mrs. Miller, the officer greeted her, touching the brim of his hat. I'm Captain James Harrington of the United States Cavalry. I hope we're not disturbing you. Not at all, Captain, Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady. What brings the cavalry to my doorstep? Harrington dismounted, followed by Thornton, whose eyes swept over her property with obvious suspicion. We're investigating reports of Comanche activity in this area, the captain explained. Mr. Thornton here tells me he visited you some weeks ago regarding a wounded warrior who escaped one of our patrols. Sarah's grip tightened on her rifle. That's right. I told Mr. Thornton then that I hadn't seen anyone. Thornton stepped forward. Thing is, Mrs. Miller, we found some interesting tracks not far from here. Tracks that suggest someone with a limp headed south from this direction. His eyes fixed on hers. And one of my men noticed something else when we watered our horses here. Bloodstains on some rocks by your wash basin. Sarah kept her expression neutral, though her mind raced. I cut myself skinning a rabbit that morning. If your man saw blood, that was likely the source. Captain Harrington studied her face. Mrs. Miller, harboring an enemy of the United States, is a serious offense. If you've been helping the Comanche, it would be better to tell us now. I live alone, Captain, Sarah said firmly. I mind my own business and expect others to do the same. The tension was broken by one of the soldiers calling out from the side of the cabin. Captain, found something here. Sarah's heart sank as the soldier approached, holding out a small arrowhead, one that Tashunka had been carrying in his pouch, and must have dropped during his stay. Harrington took the arrowhead, then looked at Sarah with new suspicion. Would you care to explain this, Mrs. Miller? Before Sarah could respond, Thornton interjected. I told you, Captain. She's been helping them. Probably feeding information about our movements, too. That's absurd, Sarah protested. I've found dozens of arrowheads on my property. The Comanche hunted these lands long before any of us arrived. The captain seemed uncertain, but Thornton pressed his advantage. Why don't we have a look inside the cabin? If she's got nothing to hide, she won't object. Sarah knew refusing would only confirm their suspicions. With no choice, she stepped aside, allowing the men to enter her home. They searched thoroughly, overturning her few possessions and examining every corner. Sarah watched, hands clenched, at her sides as they invaded the private space she had shared with Tashunka. After several tense minutes, the soldiers emerged empty-handed. Sarah allowed herself a small breath of relief. Satisfied, Mr. Thornton? She asked, unable to keep the edge from her voice. Thornton scowled but said nothing. Captain Harrington appeared apologetic. I'm sorry for the intrusion, Mrs. Miller. It seems Mr. Thornton's suspicions were unfounded. Were they? Thornton snapped. What about this? He grabbed Sarah's wrist, exposing the leather bracelet Tashunka had given her. That's Comanche work. I've seen enough of their trinkets to know. Sarah pulled her arm away. It was a gift from a trader passing through last summer. I'm entitled to wear what I please. Captain Harrington looked uncomfortable but nodded. Mr. Thornton, I think we've imposed on Mrs. Miller enough for one day. Thornton wasn't ready to give up. Captain, this woman is lying. My brother and his family were massacred by those savages. If she's helping them, that's enough, Harrington cut him off. We have no proof of any wrongdoing. He turned to Sarah. However, Mrs. Miller, these are dangerous times. A woman alone is vulnerable out here. I strongly suggest you consider relocating to the fort until these conflicts are resolved. This is my home, Captain, Sarah replied, the same answer she had given Thornton weeks earlier. I won't abandon it, Harrington sighed. As you wish. But I'll be stationing a patrol in this area for the next few weeks. For your protection, of course. Sarah understood the implication. They would be watching her. That's very thoughtful. Captain, but unnecessary. Nevertheless, he insisted, we'll be nearby if you need assistance. With a final tip of his hat, he ordered his men to mount up. As Thornton climbed back onto his horse, he fixed Sarah with a cold stare. I'll be watching you, Mrs. Miller. Those Indians killed my family, and anyone who helps them is no better than they are. After they rode away, Sarah sank onto her front step, trembling with the aftermath of fear and anger. The bracelet on her wrist seemed to burn against her skin, a symbol of the connection she now had with Tashunka and his people, a connection that had just placed her in grave danger. That night, as the first heavy snow of winter began to fall, Sarah made a decision. If the cavalry was going to be patrolling nearby, watching her every move, she needed to be more careful than ever. But she also refused to be intimidated into leaving the home she had built with her husband. As she stared into the fire, Sarah found herself wondering where Tashunka was now, if he had made it safely back to his people, if his wound had healed completely, if he ever thought of the settler woman who had chosen to save his life rather than take it. Little did she know that their paths would cross again, far sooner than she could have imagined, and under circumstances that would test both their courage and the fragile trust they had built. Winter tightened its grip on the frontier. Snow piled deep around Sarah's cabin, and the bitter cold made even simple tasks like gathering firewood a challenge. True to Captain Harrington's word, cavalry patrols passed by her property regularly, sometimes stopping to ensure she was safe. Sarah understood these visits for what they really were: surveillance. Encouraged by Thornton's persistent suspicions, December brought the heaviest snowfall anyone could remember. For nearly a week, Sarah was completely snowed in, using the time to mend clothing and read the few books she possessed by firelight. When the storm finally broke, the silence was so complete that she could hear the crystalline sound of snow falling from pine branches. It was during this deep silence that Sarah heard it, the soft crunch of footsteps in snow, too careful to be a casual visitor. Grabbing her rifle, she moved to the window, her breath catching at what she saw. 3 Comanche warriors stood at the edge of her clearing, their faces painted for war. Sarah's finger tensed on the trigger, but then she saw the figure behind them: Tashunka, thinner than when she'd last seen him but standing tall and strong. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Tashunka stepped forward, his hands raised to show he carried no weapon. Sarah hesitated, then set her rifle aside and opened the door. "Tashunka," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "why are you here?" "Must speak with you," he replied in his accented English. "Important." Sarah glanced nervously at the other warriors, who watched her with undisguised suspicion. "The cavalry patrols this area," she warned. "If they find you here, we know about soldiers," Tashunka said. "Have watched for many days. Now they gone. To fort because of big snow. We come now because it's safe." Sarah realized he was right, The patrol had mentioned returning to the fort until the worst of the winter passed. Still, this visit placed them all in danger. "Come inside quickly," she decided. Stepping back from the doorway, Tashunka spoke rapidly to his companions in their native tongue. Two remained outside, taking positions where they could watch for approach from any direction. The third, an older warrior with lines of authority etched into his face, followed Tashunka into the cabin. "This is Match," Tashunka introduced the older man. "My father, chief of our band." Sarah's eyes widened. She was in the presence of a Comanche chief, a man who had likely ordered raids on settler communities, perhaps even killed white men himself. Yet here he was, standing in her cabin, regarding her with intense curiosity. "My son tells me you saved his life," Match said in surprisingly good English. "When others of your kind would have let him die." Sarah nodded cautiously. "I couldn't turn away from someone who needed help." The chief studied her for a long moment. Strange woman, not like other white eyes. He glanced at her wrist, where she still wore the leather bracelet. "You wear mark of our family." Tashunka was right to give it. Tashunka stepped forward. "Sarah, we come to warn you. Soldiers plan big attack on our winter camp after snow melts. Many scouts watching, gathering information." Sarah frowned. "How do you know this?" "We captured soldier 2 days ago. He tell us before dying. Say man named Thornton guide them to our camp where women and children stay." The news sent a chill through Sarah that had nothing to do with the winter cold. A cavalry attack on a winter camp would be a massacre. Women, children, and the elderly would have no chance to escape. "Why tell me this?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Thornton suspects you," Tashunka replied. "Watches your cabin. If attack comes, he will blame you for helping Comanche. You in danger." Sarah sank into a chair, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. "What would you have me do?" Match and Tashunka exchanged glances. It was the chief, who answered, "Come with us. Leave this place. Soldiers will burn cabin anyway when they find it empty. Blame Comanche raid." "Leave?" Sarah looked around at the home she had built, the place where her husband's memory lived. "I can't just abandon everything. If stay you die," Match said. Bluntly, "Thornton will not let woman who helps Indian live." Sarah knew he was right. The hatred in Thornton's eyes when he discovered her bracelet had been unmistakable. If a large-scale attack on the Comanche was being planned, anyone suspected of sympathizing with them would be in grave danger. "Where would I go?" she asked. "I can't live with your people. I don't belong there any more than Tashunka would belong in a settler town." "Fort Davis," Tashunka suggested. 3 days ride south. Army there, different command, not know you. Can start new life." Sarah considered. Fort Davis was far enough away that Thornton's influence wouldn't reach there. Yet it was a place where a widow might find work and safety among her own people. "I would need time," she said finally, "to gather what I can carry." Match nodded. "One day, we help. Then guide you south. Make sure you reach fort safely." The offer surprised Sarah. "Why would you do this for me? I'm just one woman who helped your son." The chief's weathered face softened slightly. "One kindness deserves another. You saved my son, I save you. Balance is maintained." That night, as Match and one warrior kept watch outside, Tashunka helped Sarah prepare for her journey. They packed only what was essential clothing, some food, her husband's medical books, and a few small treasures she couldn't bear to leave behind. "I never thought I would leave this place," Sarah admitted as she wrapped a small portrait of her husband in a soft cloth. "This was our dream, a home of our own on the frontier." Tashunka paused in his work. "Dreams change, like river changes course. New channel, same water." Sarah smiled at the wisdom in his words. "Your English has improved. Practice with missionary." "Words you taught me," he replied with a hint of pride. "Remember everything." As dawn approached, Sarah took one last look around the cabin that had been her home. Every corner held memories, her husband's laughter by the fire, The first loaf of bread she'd baked in the small oven, the spot where Tashunka had lain as she tended his wounds. Now it would all be lost, another casualty of a conflict that seemed to have no end. Time to go, Matchk announced from the doorway. Soldiers could return any day. With a heavy heart, Sarah mounted the horse they had brought for her. As they rode away from the cabin, she looked back only once, committing the image to memory, the small structure, standing alone against the vast whiteness of the snow-covered prairie. They traveled south for 2 days, moving carefully to avoid leaving tracks that could be followed. The Comanche warriors were skilled at concealing their passage, using frozen streams and rocky ground to hide their trail. On the morning of the 3rd day, they reached a ridge overlooking a broad valley. In the distance, the American flag could be seen flying over the walls of Fort Davis. "We go no further," Matchk said, pointing to the fort. "From here, you travel alone." Sarah understood Comanche warriors approaching a fort would be shot on sight. She turned to thank them, feeling the inadequacy of words for what they had done. "I don't know how to repay you," she said simply. Matchk shook his head. "No debt, balance restored." He touched his heels to his horse and moved away, giving her a moment alone with Tashunka. "What will happen to your people?" Sarah asked. "If the attack comes, we break camp tonight," Tashunka assured her. "Move deeper into territory soldiers fear to follow. We'll be safe." Relief flooded through Sarah. At least her warning had given them time to escape. "Our paths may never cross again," she said, suddenly aware of the strange friendship that had formed between them. A friendship that had changed both their lives. Tashunka reached out and touched the bracelet on her wrist. "Paths like streams, sometimes separate, sometimes join again. Who can say where water flows?" Sarah smiled at his philosophy. "Be safe, Tashunka. You also, Sarah Miller. Woman who saved enemy and found friend." With that, he turned his horse and joined his father, disappearing into the landscape they knew so intimately. Sarah watched until they were out of sight, then urged her horse toward the fort and whatever new life awaited her there. As she rode, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had begun with a wounded man collapsing at her door. She had made a choice that day, to see the humanity in someone she had been taught to fear. That choice had cost her the home she loved, but had given her something perhaps more valuable, the knowledge that even in times of bitter conflict, compassion could bridge the seemingly unbridgeable divide between enemies. The bracelet Tashunka had given her would remain on her wrist in the years to come, a reminder that sometimes the most courageous act is not taking up arms against an enemy, but setting aside fear to recognize the common humanity that unites us all. Ahead, the gates of Fort Davis stood open, offering sanctuary and the promise of a new beginning. Sarah straightened her shoulders and rode forward, carrying with her not just the few possessions she had salvaged, but the wisdom gained from an unlikely friendship forged in the crucible of a frontier at war.